This is Deborah Atkinson, and you're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top questions and the things you struggle with most so you can have more energy and less decision fatigue about what to eat, how to move, and you can change your thoughts to flip 50 with the life and the energy you love in this second half. My guest today is kind of half of a dynamic duo. Dr. Brooke Kalanick is a licensed naturopathic and functional medicine doctor. Dr. Brooke attended Seattle, Washington's Bastyr University, where she earned a doctorate in naturopathic medicine and master's in acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine. Dr. Brooke's postdoctoral training, I have podcast on the brain. People, can you hear? In women's health and functional endocrinology, as well as her personal battle with PCOS, led her to specialize in female hormone issues, including menopause, hypothyroidism, including Hashimoto's, autoimmunity, and endometriosis, and of course, PCOS. She helps women reset their hormones, their heads, and their habits so they can finally feel at home in their bodies. She is also the co-host of the Sarah and Dr. Brooke Show and co-author of Hangry, Balance Your Hormones and Rediscover Your Joy in 5 Simple Steps. And that, my friends, is due out June of 2019. So, Dr. Brooke, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And congratulations. So as we speak, it's getting close, right?
Yes, books are going out in the world already. Yeah, it's getting close, just a couple of weeks.
I cannot wait to dive into this topic. So no matter when you're listening, this will definitely be something you want to tune into. So first of all, the name, we all get it. Hangry. Been there, done that. We'll probably do that again. Yep. And, balancing our hormones is so much what we're all about. So I want to dive into the book and kind of play with some of the things I got a sneak peek to in the galley. And so I'm just going to kind of really dive into the nitty gritty, not so much about what inspired you to read or write this, even though I think we'll get there. But what is the first step to take when listeners may be feeling overwhelmed with the health, the diet, the fitness information out there?
I know there's so much information, right? We are just in this day and age, just awash in a sea of information. And I think it can get really overwhelming really quickly. And I think it can also be, a little confusing what we need to do, right, for our hormones, because we've all seen a girlfriend or a colleague or someone doing really well on a plan. And we're sort of like, I want to try that. Her results look amazing. And then sometimes we're unclear how that might work for us. And many of us have done that, right? We jump on our girlfriend's plan and it either makes us worse or it just doesn't work. And so then we're left again, like, why didn't I get those amazing results? So, I think the first step, Sarah and I wrote this book, our original title was Too Tired to Be Happy. So we were really writing this book for women who are really overwhelmed, not feeling great, not really getting anywhere with what they're doing with their, especially in the conventional model, fatigue is such a common issue. And so often for women, it's like, well, you're doing a lot, you're a working mom, you're going through perimenopause, you're getting older. And all of those, are my favorite. Everyone in my office feels this way. So, we mistake that common for normal. And so unfortunately, women are just really not thriving. And many of them feel like they're, barely surviving. So then Sarah and I put together this elaborate program, right? That's exercise and nutrition and mindset and all of these things. And that can feel a little bit crazy to hand a woman who's already overwhelmed all of these things to do. So I think, good question. What is the first step? So I think the first step is probably to take a deep breath and know that when you understand a little bit more about what your hormones are telling you right now, you're going to know what the next step to take is. So there's a lot of ways to figure out what's going on with your hormones. So we've got testing, and we've got testing that ranges from getting a blood test to getting a urine test or a saliva test. And all of that's really going to depend on what exactly you're looking for. And of course, in the functional medicine world, we like to look at more than just, one lab level, a serum level, right, of a hormone, but looking at the metabolism of that hormone and the other hormones and biochemical things that play into that, and looking at the big picture. So that can be an important part of you knowing your first step is what hormones are out of balance for you. But sometimes we, can't get to the testing, or we really kind of want to know right away. And I think that is where we really want to just help women understand, well, what are your hormones telling you right now? And you may not always be able to tell from your own, biofeedback and symptoms, maybe what your thyroid is telling you, but are really important, not very sexy, not new, but really important hormones are insulin and cortisol. And those are talking to us all day. It's just most women don't really know what those messages are trying to tell them.
Yeah, great comment. I love that. And you know what? Let's do a shout out to Sarah, because she's not here. And hopefully you guys are splitting up and conquering and dividing and all that so that you can get the word out about the book. But talk a little bit about Sarah, because you two have a unique partnership. And then we'll dive back into, insulin and cortisol, because that's an all day topic. But
yes.
Sarah is like your best possible partner. So you, being from the functional medicine side, talk a little bit about Sarah, and let's give her a fair shake here.
Yeah. So Sarah and I got so lucky to find each other because our the work that we did really complemented each other. So I'm a little bit more on the clinical side, but a big part of my practice was also, of course, nutrition and exercise. And with Sarah, her work is mostly nutrition. She's, the creator of the Everyday Paleo brand. And, she is a 5-time best-selling cookbook author. She also owns a gym. So we had a lot of overlap in terms of exercise, mindset, and nutrition. And then sort of our unique expertise was probably her, really strong background as a gym owner and a strength coach. Amazing at creating recipes. The recipes in our book are so delicious and so easy and can transition from one meal to the next. She's very, very good at that. And our mindset worked together. And then I kind of brought the more, clinical or higher level hormone stuff together. And we met at a conference and kind of knew it was just really simpatico from the beginning, and started our podcast. And we're so lucky. I know that a lot of people say don't write a book with someone else. And Sarah's written a number of books by herself. Or definitely don't go into business with a friend. It'll ruin your friendship. And we've just been so lucky because our experience has been great.
What a great role model that is for women, I think, in collaboration. And sometimes it's when you get to a certain point in comfort level and you've got that same mission, it's perfect. So I love that. So thanks for giving her a shout. And I had the pleasure of talking with the two of you on your podcast, and I will link to that for show listeners down in the show notes. So come to it later. So circling back around, let's talk a little bit about insulin and cortisol, those two bad boys, right? That are really pulling the strings. I think for our listeners, there's a little backstory they know from listening to podcasts or from potentially reading blogs, that those are the two that are always there. And even though sex hormones during perimenopause and beyond get our attention, it tends to be insulin and cortisol that are still the biggest problems and or the source for solutions. Would you agree?
I agree. And I think you're exactly right. When we think of menopause, we instantly just think of the ovaries, right? And in women, we have that conversation, and there's certainly fallout from, and a lot of symptoms from those hormones. But like you said, insulin and cortisol are going to stay with us. And a few unique shifts happen to those hormones as we go through perimenopausal and then on into menopause. So as our ovaries start to, initially there's like that sputtering of estrogen. Progesterone sort of just starts to go on the decline, whereas estrogen is kind of fits and starts until everything levels out to an overall level. The loss of those hormones is going to profoundly affect insulin and cortisol and the way that they work. So cortisol, we know, is our stress hormone. Insulin is our hormone to lower our blood sugar. And those two, for most of us, is just a little bit of a battle most of the day, trying to, keep those two hormones sort of in balance. They're sort of tugging on each other to keep your blood sugar level, you thinking clearly and having enough energy, etc. And as we go through perimenopause and then into menopause, when we lose estrogen, we start to be a little more insulin resistant. So this may not be overtly like all of a sudden you're diagnosed on a blood test that you have insulin resistance or prediabetes, but you start to notice I'm gaining weight with my current diet, or I'm getting sleepy after I eat, or I'm getting more cravings, I'm having a harder time regulating my appetite. I'm starting to put on more weight around the middle, whereas it used to be more maybe hips and thighs, or just in any event, noticing some changes in where you put down body fat. So that can be from the loss of estrogen. And then when we start to lose progesterone, we basically become more stress sensitive. So all of our stresses, whether that's psycho-emotional stress, blood sugar ups and downs, overtraining, not getting enough recovery, having inflammation or an unhealthy gut, being overwhelmed, being unhappy, all of those things are going to affect us a little bit more as we lose progesterone. So those two hormones are going to really impact, so estrogen and progesterone really impacting those other two important, hormones that sort of keep us going. And like you said, those ones we will continue to have some say in. And as women go through this, hormone decline, we want to really think about the many, many times in a woman's life when things change, right? We were doing something that really worked, like this particular diet was fine. This particular workout, regimen was working great. I was sleeping great, doing all the things, everything was going well. Something changes, and we always just want to cling so hard to what worked for us in the past. And we have to be able to kind of roll with the new changes, because now we're going to need something a little bit different.
Amen. I love that. Many of our audience members, you're very familiar with me saying you can feel and look as good or better in your 50s and beyond, as long as you don't try to exercise like you did when you were in your 30s. Mm-hmm. All right. So back to okay, this is working for my friend. Why isn't it working for me? What do you suggest that listeners do to filter the plethora of advice out there and determine whether it will work for them or not?
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? We are getting so much information, and especially if you're in a place where you're like, I'm frustrated, my hormones feel like they're betraying me, I'm not getting results, and I want to try something different. And with things like keto and intermittent fasting, there's great evidence about both of those plans for certain things, right? Many of us eat for too many hours a day, and there's no denying that there's some real valid benefits, let's say, from intermittent fasting, and certain conditions are going to respond really well to things like the ketogenic diet. And there's, like you said, there's times in our lives when more intense training is really effective. So as we start to wonder, well, what should I be doing now? Do I need to change what I'm doing, or should I explore some of these, seemingly newer diets that have a lot of good press? So we encourage women in the book, and this is kind of how I've always done it in my practice, to follow what I call the hormone hierarchy. So thinking about because most women don't have one hormone issue, right? We're not usually just dealing with waning estrogen and progesterone, or we're not usually just dealing with insulin resistance or just a thyroid problem. Most of us have multiple hormones, especially, as time marches on. We usually have multiple hormone issues going on at the same time. And often the advice for those is completely contradictory, right? So you hear if you're dealing with low cortisol or low thyroid or autoimmunity, don't go to the gym. You can walk, maybe you can do a little yoga, but you really can't train. You shouldn't be exercising. And then we hear the opposite. If you also have insulin resistance, right? Eat less carbs. Keto might be great. You need a lot of exercise. And so a woman needs to be able to look at all of our hormone issues. So we need to look at all the things that are going on for us and not forsake one for the other, because we know when we do that, we often follow advice that makes one of those other hormone issues worse. And so if you look at it in a hierarchy and sort of address the more delicate hormones first and heal those, and then kind of work your way on down, will do much better. So the ones at the top of the list are the low cortisol and the low thyroid. So really honoring advice for those, getting, especially with the thyroid, getting some help, making sure that if you need medication, it's working properly, looking at all the sources of the stress and helping resolve the low cortisol. Then moving on to, say, suggestions for high cortisol, then insulin resistance, and then estrogen and progesterone. So those are sort of at the bottom of the list for me. There are some nuances about how you train, and things like that for estrogen and progesterone, but those are not going to apply, especially to your demographic, because we're not having those normal cycles anymore, right? We're not having that predictable estrogen high time and progesterone high time. And that research and that information is valid, but there's so many women that are not having normal cycles or regular cycles. And so that information is less helpful for us. So if we follow it sort of in that order, we can really honor everything that's going on and not do things that, really sacrifice one hormone issue for another.
Great advice. Love that. And it's very reflective of the Flipping 50 specialist. So trainers out there who are going through the program right now, you so get this and it resonates. So listeners, there is help on the way. There's a whole army coming through. Brooke, I have a question for you. Yes. And this one, I think most women will resonate with. We've got this gift that keeps on giving, so many more hormones to deal with in men. And why is it that it's so much more important for us to take that hierarchy, that complete hormonal system approach, even more than men?
Well, we have, normal fluctuations, right, throughout the month, and then throughout our lifetime. We go through pregnancy, we go through perimenopause, and it's really amazing, and that allows our body to do some cool things. With ovulation, of course, the only outcome doesn't have to be a pregnancy, but that's, an orchestrated system that makes our female hormones. Obviously, if we do have a pregnancy, estrogen allows us to carry a thing that's not really us, right? It's not really us, it's kind of us, but it's not. And we are able to sort of re-regulate our immune system, to do that during a pregnancy. And all of that is sort of thanks to our very adaptable hormone system that then allows us to have a much more adaptable immune system. And so as we go through all these changes, we suffer the fallout of that a little bit more significantly, right? We, with all these estrogen and progesterone things that they do, helping, boost our brain chemicals, both of those hormones can help us feel much more relaxed. And we know when we lose them going through perimenopause and menopause, we have a harder time sleeping, we have more issues with our mood, with irritability. And so we do really want to honor how those changes are really affecting us. And back to sort of the immune system part of this, we are so much more sensitive to inflammation as we go through these changes because we're losing some of the estrogen is got a little bit of a mixed relationship with inflammation. There's aspects in which it lowers inflammation, but certainly as we get an imbalanced estrogen metabolism issues, we can have more inflammation. So really, we need to honor kind of all of that as we go through these changes. And we're just, because of all that, so much more sensitive to fluctuations, which is amazing, but it can also feel a little bit frustrating as you're dealing with some of these hormone imbalances.
So true. And such great insight. So thanks for succinctly putting that together. But I really want to use and abuse you while you're here.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you're the perfect person to relay this information. There's, a sneaky hormonal disruptor that women are probably less familiar with. Maybe hearing enough about it to be dangerous and to perk up and wonder, is this me? But I think we reach and we kind of go for all of those things that are becoming a little bit more common in language because we're reading it, we're hearing it. But this one doesn't come up. So what is that hormone disruptor that a lot of women might be struggling with but do not even know it yet?
Yeah, so I think we're talking about histamine intolerance. So we touched on inflammation. And so inflammation is certainly going to be a bigger factor as we lose our estrogen and progesterone. And one of the things that may flare up is a histamine intolerance. And we've got more significant histamine conditions called mast cell activation. Mast cells are certain immune cells that secrete histamine. And sometimes we have too many. Sometimes we have just overzealous ones that, secrete histamine too easily. But what we're seeing on the rise is a less severe, issue with histamine, and that is what we call histamine intolerance. So if you are dealing with a lot of hormone symptoms that just don't seem to be getting better, or you're dealing with, kind of vague skin things, and one of the hard things about histamine is it can cause a lot of symptoms. It can cause symptoms from headaches to a more painful or irregular cycle, to breakouts, so anything from acne to eczema. It can cause frequent urination, digestive issues, inflammation, joint pain, difficult recovery from workouts, insomnia, agitation. all of those things. And you don't have to have all of the symptoms on that list to be dealing with a histamine issue. And that histamine is not the only cause of those issues. But if you've kind of explored a lot of things, or you have some of those, symptoms that just now you have more, like your digestive issues seem to be getting worse and you're following a really good diet, your skin issues are flaring up and you can't seem to, figure it out, or hormone issues are getting worse, this is something to look at. So there's a little bit of, it's not super easy to test for histamine intolerance because histamine is degraded quickly in the blood. So you certainly could measure blood levels of histamine, and they may be high, but if they're low, that may not tell you much. Looking at urine histamine is more accurate, or methylhistidine, but you need to have the urine very cold. It needs to be sent right away. And so I think one of the empowering things to do in this case is if you're looking at this, and I've got an article on my site about it. We've got one of our bonuses for if you pre-order the book or order the book, you can get a 20-page histamine guide. So if you're looking at that, or you're Googling it and you're thinking this might be me, one of the best things to do is just start lowering the histamine intake in your diet and see if that improves things. Now, a couple reasons why this might be happening. So we have more and more issues with methylation, more issues with this like simple biochemical reaction we should be doing efficiently in our bodies. And some of that is some genetic issues, but a lot of it's just lifestyle burden. So if you have MTHFR, you have some B vitamin deficiencies, you have elevated homocysteine, you might be talking to someone about methylation issues. So we have an increased burden on our system, and that might be one reason. When I did my 23andMe, I discovered that I have issues, genetically speaking, issues in every single way that you process histamine. So right on down, like every enzyme that could be compromised, I have issues with it. So you might have some genetic predisposition. You might have our methylation pathways being just overly bogged down in a modern environment, or you might have some chronic infections that tend to increase histamine. This tends to be like SIBO, sometimes Candida, and also things like Epstein-Barr, like if you've had mono in the past and have any chronic virus issues. So if any of those things are going on for you, sometimes you can fix the underlying cause, like treat the infection. Sometimes, like me, I have to just be mindful of it because again, I have all of those issues genetically speaking. And so if you're going to look at this diet, it is really restrictive. And it's interesting because a lot of the quote unquote health foods, especially in the paleo and ancestral world, can be really high histamine. So fermented foods, bone broth, collagen peptides, all these things we're recommending can be high histamine or histamine releasing. And then there's a lot of just common, healthy foods like avocados and bananas, spinach, berries. Dairy is another one. So there's a lot of foods that have histamine or cause histamine release, or they inhibit the enzyme in your gut that can break down histamine. So if you decrease these foods for a couple weeks, it's usually enough time to know that it's making a difference. It doesn't necessarily tell you your underlying cause or how long you should stay on the diet, but it would at least give you an insight that this might be something going on for you. And the way this interacts with your female hormones is that estrogen actually makes this worse. So if you've noticed that pre-ovulation or right with your period that your headaches are worse, your skin can be a little complicated because that can be other things, but your digestive issues are worse, you're more congested, your allergies are worse during those times. And certainly with perimenopause, it's going to be a little bit unpredictable, but anytime there's a high estrogen time, so remember during that time, it's a lot of fluctuation, right? So any of those high estrogen times for you could be a flare of a symptom. So if you just notice like intermittently, you're starting to get worse symptoms, that could be a sign that this is an issue. So the estrogen tends to make it worse. It inhibits the DAO enzyme in your gut, and it has some other roles in affecting those mast cells that release it. And on the other hand, progesterone actually helps it. So as you lose progesterone, for whatever reason, stress, going through perimenopause, or like me, have PCOS, then you might be seeing some of these issues creep up then as well.
Great advice. So I love that you really mentioned, lifestyle, the increased burden, and then came right back to tangible things. And so I think every one of our Flipping 50 listeners is most likely wondering about that inventory. So if you are one of those people who've you've looked at everything, you're living a healthy lifestyle, quote unquote, eating the right things. You're doing a lot of the recommended things like eating bone broth or drinking bone broth. You're doing ferments. You're taking your collagen powder. You're probably having smoothies with spinach and berries. All of those things, if you're feeling like you're not getting any better, you may want to remove for a couple of weeks. So great tangible tips. And I want to circle back around to this one, I think, bottom line. Every listener here can kind of recognize this in herself. I mean, you and I both place such an importance on managing stress and cortisol for better overall health. What advice, what takeaways can you share about making that easier?
Yeah. So I think that, what I've learned over all these years, and Sarah had the same experience, was there's, kind of a limit to how much information somebody, if they're under a lot of stress, can handle, right, with their nutrition and their exercise. And so many of us, have worked with, women, and like they've got the information, but they're still not either able to implement it, or they're not able to just really feel okay about it, because it all just feels really overwhelming. And so what started out for us as a book about, being tired related to cortisol turned into this, our much bigger mission became like, how do we help women be happier? So if you're doing all the right things and you lost weight or hormones feel a little bit better balanced, but you're still not happy, like, what is that really worth for us, right? Because a lot of us, especially as things change with our hormones, it requires more, right? We sometimes have to be more diligent with things in our diet. I know personally right now, like if I have to be so respectful of my sleep. I just don't tolerate that well at all. And all of my hormones really suffer. Whereas that wasn't something I needed to place such a priority on before. So what sort of developed for us was, if we can do a couple things for women. One is, make the information that we put in our book as straightforward as possible, which it is a lot, right? It is a nutrition program and a exercise program. Help all of those things be filtered through the hormone hierarchy. So we're not doing anything to, make you worse. Overturn some of those stones like histamine or inflammation that might be in our way. All of that was great, but we need a couple things. And one is, all of that is going to be more successful for women if they can rest it on some sort of foundation. So we created what we call our 5 pillars. The first one being, find and commit to what works for you. And then just the rest of them, so it's like figuring out, do I have a histamine intolerance? Do I need to be gluten-free? What kind of workout's going to work for me? And then the next step's often the hardest, right? Some women know what they need to do. Others are still figuring that out. But even when we know, sometimes it can be hard to really commit to that without it feeling unfair and overwhelming and stressful and tedious and time consuming. So when we can change our mindset around that and give some real tools to commit to that, that part gets a little bit easier. And so we felt it was really important to, give some real tangible foundations to rest all of that stuff we know we need to be doing on. So the other ones, are opting out of overwhelm. What can you take off your plate? What can you say no to? What can you, how can you really set your priorities, knowing that this is something that really matters to me? This didn't come from, what my mom thinks is important, or my neighbor, or whatever. Full engagement living, being really present for our lives, being your best friend, and then being who you are. And I think for your listeners, this is where we really saw this. And it was a little bit heartbreaking when I first started working with women and I started doing more work in menopause, we, in that age group, so many women get, and I'm 44 now. So we get to this point in our life, my kids are still little, but a lot of women, our kids are older, our jobs have changed. Maybe we are, in a more, it tends to be a little bit more stable situation for a lot of us. And we have a little more time to think about, well, what can I do for a hobby? What are my interests? And we've almost forgotten it, right? We've gotten so good at taking care of all the other stuff that we forget that we need to play and we need to have a hobby and we need to do things just because they bring us joy. And we really felt that that's a lot what's missing in our good functional medicine and all of our, your audience, our audience for our podcast are smart women. This is not, it's not the first time they've heard about strength training or gluten or whatever. They're really informed. And yet this was, we felt the piece that wasn't there for women, which was, tuning into what brings them joy, what makes them happy, and being who they are.
That's such a great mission. And really, ultimately, I think what everybody wants, anybody listening right now who's thinking, I want to lose weight, I want to get rid of this belly fat. I mean, ultimately, underneath it, if we could probe there's so much more to why. What's that going to do for you? What do you really ultimately want from that? And I think we can all agree it's really not the weight, although ultimately that will most likely be a part of it. It comes back to, who will you be then? What things will you do? How will you share the gifts that are uniquely yours? I love that. Yeah. Really, really cool. Okay. So I've got one more question I have to ask you, the biggest one of the day. But first, I want to make sure we get this in. Where can everybody learn more about the book and get the details?
Yeah. So sarahandrbrooke.com/hangry-book, actually /hangry book also works. But that's where you can get, the book's available for pre-order, or it comes out on June 25th. But when you pre-order or when you purchase the book, we put together 17 free bonuses. We really wanted to, I do feel like there's a lot of information in this book, and we wanted to make it two things. Make it a little bit more user-friendly. So if there's some great tools from Sarah about taking one of the recipes in the book and turning it into 4 different meals. So you aren't cooking all the time, yet you're not eating the same thing for 5 days in a row. And then I also wanted to provide some resources for women that want to go a little bit deeper. So I did some webinars on brain and neurotransmitters. I did one on PCOS. I did one on menopause and weight loss, so menopause and metabolism. And then I did another one really walking through all the aspects of thyroid physiology and medication. So there's a lot of great things there if you want to. And those are available now, even before the book comes out.
Fantastic. Okay. So everybody, you have your marching orders. You have a little homework really before you get the book, and then you can dive into that too. Love it. Okay. And last but not least, Dr. Brooke, is there a question I should have asked you that I missed?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I know your audience knows the importance of strength training as we go through these changes. We're less anabolic, and we have to, not hinder our hormones by exercise. But of course, smart exercise and strength training, it really is the foundation for health, in my opinion. Muscle mass is one of the best things we can have as far as our longevity. So I think you guys know about all of that. I would say if there's ever, when you're going through transitions, especially, and all of your blood tests are normal, and you are talking to your doctor and you're like, everything looks fine on paper, I still have all the symptoms in the book. And we kind of touched on this. It's just something I always want women to remember is get your inflammation evaluated. So what I call the great hormone messmaker. It's going to impact all of your hormones. It's so easy, especially as we lose estrogen and progesterone, to end up more inflamed. And there's certainly, our modern world can be very inflammatory. Lack of sleep, overtraining, all of those things. And so that's something to always make sure that we're looking at when we, again, have normal lab tests and we have the symptoms. So we're making the hormone and the levels looking normal, but we are not getting the effect from it. Just make sure we're evaluating that. And maybe one more tool from the book I can share with your audience is how to know if you're overdoing it in the gym. Like, how do we know when we're overtraining? I think my gift is acronyms. I think that's what I was telling Sarah. Acronyms may be my love language. So my little system for knowing that and checking in with that hormone biofeedback is RAMP. So the R is for reluctance to train. Like, are you feeling like you think about your next workout and you're like, I don't want to do that. I'm not ready. It sounds too intimidating. Does not sound good. Needing to super pump yourself up, really get a good adrenaline thing going before you go in. So if you're reluctant to train, the A is for achiness. Do you feel like you're excessively achy or sore days after your workout, it's not improving, or if you're having more achiness in your joints versus your muscles, or if it just seems inappropriate for the workout that you did. The M is for mood changes or moodiness. Are you noticing more anxiety or depression? And the P is for puffiness. Are you noticing any water retention? I tend to see it in my face. Some people will see it more in their hands and feet. RAMP, that's a good kind of biofeedback tool to look at, my hormones are not happy with what I'm doing and I'm going to need to dial it back. We certainly have things like HRV monitoring, and we've got some more objective data, but that's a really good tool for women to have to know if they need to dial it down.
Love that. Okay, RAMP. Don't miss that. Love it. And Dr. Brooke, thanks so much for being here. Can't wait to get my hands on the real book.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet. And listeners, if you have a question that I missed, leave it below the show link at flipping50.com/hangry, and join us on the Flipping 50 TV Facebook page to get all the juicy resources, how to connect for the book, how to connect to Dr. Brooke and to Sarah at Facebook and social media pages, and the links so that you can get those will be right here in the show notes at flipping50.com/Hangry. And hey, if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating in iTunes. It really helps. And then share this with a friend to surround yourself with a supportive community of women on the same journey. What are you waiting for? Start Flipping 50 today.